Many of us are experiencing a great awakening, a spiritual awakening, awakening of self, awakening of the world. I'm going to break down the steps of awakening in this video. I'm going to also offer additional information around what it means to be awakened and where we are going with this process. First of all, the initial step into the awakening process does not mean transcendence, and it does not mean that we have arrived as far as we see all, we know all, we are all. There's a lot of work to do within this process, and I am going to break it down of the different steps, what you might be going through yourself, or even some guidance on how to navigate this incredible process and unfolding that many of us are experiencing right now. And as I mentioned, the first initial steps of awakening doesn't mean that we are transcendent. It doesn't mean, it's actually pretty much far from transcendence. It doesn't mean that we are self-actualized. I'm going to also include information around these two aspects of where we can go with the awakening process. The awakening is allowing for us to see our life differently. It's allowing us, it's inviting us to look at ourselves differently. It's inviting us to look at life differently, to start to question things, to start to probe and search and explore within our deeper recesses of our being so that we can unlock the hidden aspects within our psyche, within ourselves, and of course, start to connect more with others. Now, when we move into our final stage of transcendence, that is where we become one. That is where we become transcendent of our ego, of fears, of criticism, of divisiveness, where we can arrive in a state of wholeness, purity, and oneness, and of course, unconditional love. So the process of awakening is going to start with the pre-awakening, which basically is questioning one's self-life, maybe becoming very dissatisfied with where one is within their career, maybe even relationships or within themselves. This can also cause a lot of depression. You can imagine how many people in the world right now are suffering from depression. We have a choice of allowing to explore our deeper selves or succumbing to our unconscious patterns and remaining in states of maybe confusion or dissatisfaction or depression, or even escapism or numbing out altogether. This path, this unfolding, if you will, is part us being thrust into a new experience of life if we take hold of the momentum and if we dive into the depths of ourselves. Now, it's not for the faint of heart. Many people will dive into this opportunity and will grab hold of it, but it does come with a lot of deep, hard work. It comes with a lot of questioning and exploring and going through ups and downs, and I'm sure many of you have experienced it like I have as well. But when we are resilient and when we don't give up on this process, we will reach a state of transcendence. We will reach that state of self-actualization. I do feel that when we are moving through the awakening stages, the early stages, we may need guidance, but I do feel that as we become more self-actualized, we will be able to understand and see ourselves more, therefore turning into self-healers, therefore finding the tools and the guidance of our own to navigate these difficult times and to go deeper within ourselves and to make constructive changes in our lives. So the pre-awakening stage, as I mentioned, right? It is this time where we are questioning ourselves, where we are looking at maybe our life just a little bit differently or just becoming completely dissatisfied, which needs to happen in order for us to almost, in some cases, hit rock bottom, or in some cases to go through a loss or to create loss in our lives so that we can start over completely as a new person. The awakening is that sudden realization. So this is now where we have moved into a state of realization, where we are looking at ourselves differently and realizing that something needs to change, that perhaps maybe a relationship needs to be separated from, perhaps maybe a career path needs to be left behind, perhaps maybe a new self needs to be explored. This is the big opening to incredible deep work and into self-actualization. Integration is a part of the awakening process, or will come actually after the awakening process. So the awakening process can lead us into the dark night of the soul. It can lead us into depression as well. It can create a great sense of loss, despair, uncertainty, devastation, and discomfort. Physically, emotionally, spiritually, and psychologically. We are at a place where this phase will break us open in some kind of form. And I've talked about this in another episode where I talked about the barriers to shadow work, where we are now starting to see ourselves more, therefore opening up the channels towards our unconscious self, which most likely has been dormant for most of our lives. Now, the awakening process allows us to look in deeper, opening up the doorway, but during this process, there's going to be a lot of fragmentation, a lot of splintering, as I've called it, where we may feel shattered. We may not know who we are, and we may become very confused about our direction. And do not worry, this is completely part of the process. This happens in order to find our true self, to find who we are, and to align with our purpose, our potential, and our path in life, our chosen path, if you will, to some degree. The integration process is extremely important. It is a time where we get to sit with our emotions, we get to feel, and we get to sense the changes taking place. Can be very uncomfortable, but this is where a lot of change happens under the surface. This is also where we get to adjust to a new way of being, a new way of seeing, a new way of feeling, a new way of sensing. And when we start to adjust, our body needs time to adjust, and our mind needs time to adjust, our emotions need time to adjust, and our energetic self needs time to adjust. So it is very important to give yourself time and space to sit within the period of integration, to feel, to sense. And the more time that you give yourself in this space, the more sensitive you will become. Your senses will become heightened. You will feel into yourself more. And this is where a lot of people can turn into self-healers. This is where we will start to internalize and to understand our deeper self, feeling ourselves inside in such a multidimensional way. And what I mean by multidimensional is we get to sense aspects of ourselves that we have not sensed before. When we live busy lives, when we are in the mode of doing, we are not necessarily sensing and tuning in. We are not giving ourselves the time and space to feel and to process and to navigate and to probe into areas of our lives for inquiry and for self-exploration and for integration. When we become very busy, when we become preoccupied, we move so fast through life, we are shoving down more and more and more our emotions, what needs to be seen, what needs to be felt, what needs to be integrated. And when we suppress, when we avoid, when we move through life in this mode, our body is just naturally going to eventually tell us to slow down or look at an aspect that needs to be looked at. That's where sicknesses and illnesses come up. That's where depression can show as well, or even just a deep sense of non-belonging. Also, I should mention when our ego forms, and our ego is not a bad thing. Our ego is actually a good aspect of ourself to see ourselves more and to go deeper into ourself, to understand what the ego is, how the ego plays into our lives, and how to transcend from our ego. And our ego gives us a huge amount of information. It holds a lot of information about our persona, about what we've built, who we've been, the patterns in our life, and how we are behaving. Also, even some of our emotional and mental reactions that come from a very unconscious place. Our ego is part of our identity, but our self is our whole being. And when we move through this phase, we do become more connected with our true self, with who we truly are, and that is our whole being. Eventually, at the end stage, we do move into transcendence, which I'll get to in just a moment. During the stage of integration, we will then become more self-actualized. So if you are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, self-actualization used to be at the top of the pyramid. Transcendence now is at the very top. Self-actualization had been split to accommodate self-actualization and then transcendence. So what is self-actualization? It is when we become more and more aware of ourselves, when we become more aware of our patterns, our behaviors, our projections, how we are interpreting life, our patterns that we are living under, and even becoming more aware of our body, how our whole entire unit of self plays into itself. All the 4 quadrants, which I talk about often, our emotional self, our psychological self, our mental, our mind, our energetic self, and our physical self. And when we become more self-actualized, we tune into these areas within ourselves and we become more whole. We also understand what needs to heal, what needs to change, what needs to adjust in order for us to make the proper adjustments for healing and for transmutation, and to align us and to start to calibrate ourselves in alignment with our true authentic self, with our true pure whole self. Self-actualization allows us to also understand our relationship with others. So our ego likes to protect ourselves. We may tend to cut people out. We may tend to keep distance. This is where divisiveness comes in. This is where criticism comes in. This is where attacking others comes in, is from the egoic self. Again, wanting to have a form of protection and safety, but that can also, again, create distance between one another. When we think of transcendence, when we eventually move into a state of transcendence, which I'm getting to in just a moment, we will become one. We will know how to navigate our life with trust, with ease, with fluidity, and create even more than ever imagined. When we are working at one, when we are at harmony with one another, we can be extremely powerful and extremely creative. So moving from self-actualization, when we have realized more about ourselves, understood our ego, from all the dimensions within ourselves, understanding how our projections may affect other people, being able to read other people, being able to sense other people really well, being able to sense internally within ourselves, within the dimensions of ourselves, we will then eventually be able to transcend. So transcendence is a state of unity and higher consciousness. And when we are in the stage of integration and self-actualization, we will also be opening up new areas of consciousness, seeing ourselves more, seeing life more. And when we probe within ourselves, we are opening up levels of consciousness within ourselves. We become more expansive, we see more, we understand more. We also release the attachments of anger, resentment, shame, criticism, guilt, and fear. And so those aspects of ourselves that we harbor within become released through the process of integration and self-actualization. So we are all healers. We all have the ability to heal ourselves. We all have the ability to self-actualize. We all have the ability to be powerful manifestors. We all have the ability to love and to create an incredible life and to have harmony within ourselves. We all have an incredible ability to sense ourselves in ways that we have never imagined. I have been very surprised through this process myself. But during the process of self-actualization and integration, moving into, I would say, a little bit of the equilibrium, or a little bit of the relationship between the self-actualization and the integration process, this is where we get to play a lot, in a sense, with the unfoldings that happen within ourselves emotionally, psychologically, energetically, and physically. So we get to sense more. We can make fine adjustments. We go in and out of the shadow. We go in and out of our unconscious self. But during that process, we're constantly changing. We're constantly adapting, and we're constantly aligning more and more and more with who we truly are. Therefore, again, as I mentioned, we become more self-actualized and more aware of our patterns, our behaviors, how we've been acting, how we've been reacting, how we've been seeing and perceiving life and certain relationship dynamics, and also understanding what has created separateness from others, for example. So when we see this within our deep unconscious self and within our conscious self, we become more self-actualized, which moves us into that state of transcendence, into a higher state of consciousness, and into a state of unity, also unconditional love. And we have been able to forgive our greatest teachers and send love towards them, send love towards ourselves for maybe some of the errors that we have made, or some of the things that we may be ashamed of. When we can be at peace with ourselves fully and arrive in a state of that transcendence, of unconditional love, the 5D experience, if you would like to call it that as well. When we get to transcend, we move beyond the egoic state, we move beyond fear, and we move beyond resentment or any attachments to others or to the 3D experience or the physical plane. Transcendence is purely the state of unconditional love, expansiveness, and unity, like I said. When we can become one, when we can work as one, create as one, and be in harmony and flow and sync with one another, where we are not criticizing each other, where we are not creating divisiveness, where we are not throwing shame or hatred or arguing or setting up barriers between others, where we can open up to trust. Now, I know some of us are moving into that state. Perhaps maybe we'll say a good portion of the world is not there. So how do we open ourselves up and trust when there's part of the world that is not quite here yet? Well, it's that simple. It's when you are in a state of transcendence, you will have experiences that match your state of being. So you will not be inviting other experiences that are still existing on this planet into your life experience. You will be in a transcendent state. And if some experiences do show up that are difficult, that are challenging, you will be able to transcend from them. You will be able to navigate them easier. You will be able to completely alter the experience of the other people based on how you are feeling, based on how you are sensing, and based on your interactions with those people. You will be able to elevate where they are at. You will be able to elevate their state of consciousness and their state of being simply by being able to rise above with unconditional love and being able to see them for who they are and being in some way maybe supportive, or just simply by being in your light. So as I mentioned, the first stage of awakening requires a lot of work. If one is brave, if one is courageous, and if one dares to walk through their shadow, to go through their shadow, venture through their shadow, venture through deep into their unconscious self, this is the path of transcendence that will lead you to that state of self-actualization and transcendence. We all have the ability to be healers. We all have the ability to be seers. We have a great depth of gifts and talents that have not been accessed yet within ourselves that are just starting to open up for many of us. So as I mentioned, there are a few stages to the path of, I would say, awakening, or to the path of transcendence through the initial opening of the awakening. There may be moments where you could dip in and out of any of these stages at any time, as this is not a linear process. It is quite an unfolding. There may be moments of transcendence. There may be moments of integration, which is completely fine, completely normal. But the more self-actualized we can be, that is where we get to make the adjustments. That is where we get to fine-tune. That is where we get to seek maybe help, or seek resources, or even tune in and become a master of oneself, to be that self-healer and to understand just naturally what it's going to take for maybe an adjustment to be made. All right, so I hope this video found you when you need it the most. I am wishing you all the best on your path forward, on your journey to transcendence and beyond. And I will see you again very soon. Take care.